Pajashig, welcome. Welcome to InDigital Insights. Monique Manatch and Deshnikos, Kitikanik and Ishnabek and Dojiva. My name is Monique Manatch, and I'm a member of the Algonquins of Barrier Lake. Today, we have a wonderful opportunity to speak with Maritza Louis. And Maritza is an animation artist doing fantastic work. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Maritza, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Weislach, je pis nasilch, squeeze Maritza Louis, for the Starwoman, I Tumtwi Florina Joseph, squeeze Teal Schwachmick, I Meestum Clarence Mike Lewis, clapping hands, squeeze Teal Silch, has suppose Apana. My name is Maritza Louis, for the Starwoman. My mother was Florina Joseph, the Schwachmick Nation. My father was Clarence Mike Lewis, clapping hands of the Silch Nation. And I'm happy to be here right now to talk to you guys about animation, Indigenous, VFX, games. I've been working in the industry now for about 20 years in various fields. I'm not an animator. It is a catch-all. That's totally okay. Everybody calls me an animator. I have no sense of timing to save my life. I can kind of see some of it now, but not really. I'm a character modeler or a biz dev modeler who was is a visual development character modeler. And right now I'm currently working at Walt Disney Animation Studios. And you may have seen some of the stuff I worked on, Moana 2, which is now out. Go download today online through proper channels and watch and support some Indigenous work. It's the exciting part about the type of work I do. I do a lot of kind of talks in STEAM and connection. And when you talk about STEAM, it's science, technology, engineering, and art and maths. I love that they pluralize maths. It's always kind of fun. So another talk, usually how I kind of start, is how technology helped me find my art and get a real job, because they often say that art, that's cute. You want to work in art. That's not, you don't have a real job in art. And I'm like, well, yes, there are. And I've had 20 years to prove it. And if I count the overtime, I'm going to say maybe 25 or 30 years. But, it started out quite young. I loved art. I loved sculpting. We made mud pies. We built forts. I grew up on my reservation out in the interior in the Okanagan and Vernon on the west side there. Up in the area lovingly called the Boonies. And I didn't think we were poor at the time, but yes, we were poor by, Western standards. But we had so much free time to do things, and you can go riding if you can catch the horses. If I could get my dad to saddle one of them, he might have, but quite often we just go bareback, and if you catch them, it's totally fine. It's my sister here, and these are some of my cousins. I have like most Native folks, you have a ridiculous amount of cousins. And I grew up in the traditional reservation special house that looks like you go to every res, they all have the same house. Grew up in one of those too. I had some really cool parents. They were really supportive and wonderful. This is my father. I spoke before. His mother went to residential school, and my grandfather did not. And so he really pushed to try and keep our culture and our family. And he can speak in Syilxian, and it was absolutely really cool to hear him speak in our language. And it's so exciting to hear the revitalization of our language is happening now as well. And, my dad was awesome about these kinds of things. He would take us to ceremony, we go to Weepy, we go pick sage in the summer and berries. And, my mom, she was from Chuchwa, past Kamloops, and she was a part of the Kamloops residential school system. And she managed to survive that space. She had a lot of her siblings that went there, and majority of them ran away they couldn't survive in that space. So they ran away and hid in the apple orchards in Colville and blended in with some of our Hispanic cousins down that way. Actually, how I got my name, I was named after one of the Peruvian girls that was adopted in Colville. She was after a Peruvian singer, Maritza Rodriguez. So I got that name instead of Elizabeth. Thank you, Auntie Phyllis, who's no longer with us, for that one. Like I said, I've been doing this type of work for about 20 years, and this is some of the places that I've worked at. You might recognize a few of them. I've worked in games, from sports to fighter shooters. I've worked in cartoons and animation, game cinematics, visual effects, all kinds of things. And it's a ever-changing landscape, and it's always kind of fun, and I really enjoy it. And this is what we call a showreel. And a showreel is how you show your work to prospective clients or studios that you're going to be applying to. And it's a portfolio. So you take the snippets of the pieces of work that you've done. When you first start out, you would have a demo reel, which is showing your own personal work that you would then get other work from because you don't have actual production experience at the time to do a show reel. So this is where they differ. Very few studios provide the opportunity for you to actually take assets and have turntables of them. And when we'll kind of deep dive into that a little bit more.
That's amazing. Wow, that's incredible.
Oh, thank you. It's been a labor of love. A lot of times the space can be challenging and growing, and there's just so much to learn, and it's constantly evolving, which also kind of makes it all that more special and awesome. because you put so much of yourself onto a screen, and it's not something that you can, like, I can't take these assets when I'm done creating them home with me, but I take that skill that I've developed at each time I go there with me, and I learn something new at each space. You're working with so many different artists at so many different locations at different scales and sizes of studios. Like, I've worked at some where, like Sony, it was like thousands of people at different places, and then you're in a little room and you're with some other artists, you're working and you're hustling. And then I've worked on other places where the whole floor is open concept, where you're with every other department on the floor and you're interacting with each department. And because of the type of work I do is like at the front end, what we call front end, you know, you do work with quite a bit of the different departments. And that journey kind of started from, when I was younger. I did love art, and I love all this stuff. And then, intergenerational trauma kind of kicked in, and I became a little bleep ass, when for a period of time where I, I ran around and I did the things you weren't supposed to be doing, because my folks were dealing with some stuff, and I, like a lot of other folks, I went and I lived with other families for a period of time, and then I came back. And at that time, I decided to buckle down and to take things a little bit more seriously, realizing that, well, education, is really important. And my folks, education helped my mom get away from the residential school. Um, Hard work helped my father, in his pursuit and his work, and having that grit to do these things. So I took a lot of the skills that they had taught me, and I really focused. And I had some really great teachers. I spoke to about Mrs. Thompson before. She was wonderful. And her husband was actually, fantastic. So these are also about finding your allies and your supporters along the way, and not being afraid to ask for help. So that's something that I think, I still struggle with, because I think a lot of us, when you grow up with trauma, the natural inclination is to do it yourself out of fear of many things. But it takes us healing and growing from the intergenerational trauma to become better selves for the next generation and for those around us as well. So I at first I went to a program called Katimovic, which was, yeah, I know, right? You're like, well, it still exists. People went to the thing. I'm like, I'm one of those weirdos that went and did it. And I did it, and Katimovic kind of highlighted for me what I didn't want to do, which I think a lot of our youth, gets so overwhelmed by all the possibilities of, like, there's a lot of things I want to do. I'm not entirely sure. I want to do it for money or stability. Honest to God, I say, don't pursue a career in these types of areas for the money. Do it because you can't not do it. It wakes you up. It drives you. If I could be doing anything else, I would, but I can't. I love this work so much that I come in and I do it, and I'm immediately uplifted when I'm doing it, and I kind of get lost in it. And it's like, when I was younger, it was all 2D art, and I did some sculpture, some welding, some other work like that. When I was in Katimovic, the one thing that I kind of fell back towards was realizing, when I was stationed in 3 places. One was a teacher's assistant in Quebec and St. Perpetu. I didn't have a good time. But I did like helping the students. That was really cool. I also was in Quesnel, and I volunteered in an Alzheimer ward, and I got to see what it was like for my mom to have to work in that kind of space. And it was just like, I was too much of a bleeding heart. I'm like, I will not survive here. I don't think I'd be like, I would have too many feelings. There's too many cute old people. It would just be too much for me. And I realized, okay, I can't be a nurse. Okay, check that off. That's cool. And the last place I was at a food bank, and in near Waterloo in Kitchener. So when I was there, I was working with a lot of different people from different backgrounds, and I thought that was so cool. And it was so interesting to see, like, how alike we are, and how, that we're not as different as we think we are. And I kind of just love that atmosphere. And when I was there, the thing that brought me the most joy was, like, I took some art classes when I was there again, just because I keep it going, and really kind of decided that I'm going to make a go of it. And we're kind of around this time, there was this new technology that was emerging, and it was called CGI or CG. And I only know it as a CG, but everybody calls it CGI, which I always find funny. it's like putting a little pinky up on it that always feels weird. But the because it was like Jurassic Park. I think it's a touchstone for a lot of folks working in the industry, and along with Reboot, which was done here in Vancouver, and a lot of other work that was kind of happening. And at that time, it was really hard to kind of see where and how to get in there. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of folks that worked in that area. Nobody. I didn't know any Indigenous animators, modelers, anything remotely related to animation. I had a lot of family that were in the traditional arts, painters, sculptors, carvers, and that kind of work. My father, he worked in the forestry. He was a maintenance man at a treatment center, and he also bred quarter horses. And so he was a very busy man, and we come from a big family of they're all rodeo and the Rodeo Hall of Fame, and they're all cowboys, and they all with horses. And and on my mom's side, it was different. They're more in the humanities, and they worked in like band offices. One aunt, she worked as a secretary at the Union of Chiefs. She was wonderful. And another aunt that was just so much caring about her family, but none of them worked in tech specifically. And so I didn't have a computer growing up, and I think that is still a barrier for a lot of our people having access to technology that way. But our people have always been technical. They've always used math. They've always worked in these spaces, and they've combined this into a very it's built into our culture. And to say that there's not Indigenous people in tech is crazy, and to think that we're not capable of being in tech is crazy. And I think we talked about before about how there's been a lot of systematic issues put in place to make it so that our people make it incredibly difficult for them to find jobs, to leave the reserve early on, and to get into these spaces. You talked about your family needing to move to Toronto, and they didn't want you to speak the language because they wanted to get you ahead. That's the same thing that happened in my family too. And my mom left the residential school. That was such a tough space for her. She lost a sister there. She stayed just to keep her sister safe, and then her sister eventually died. One of her sisters died there from tuberculosis, and I think they carry that with them, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, we would have gone to residential school ourselves if my parents hadn't decided to raise us in Toronto. I would have gone to Amos, probably, because that's where everybody from my reserve went. And yeah, that trauma, how do people are still moving past it or trying to heal from it, and it's intergenerational. Now they're finding it literally in our genes. Like
yeah,
people, and I don't think I think that's every human. I think
oh,
that every
definitely,
human has that kind of, not that kind of trauma, but there's a trauma that goes with most people. On my mom's side, they're Scottish, and of course, there's trauma. You know, another colonized country.
they really got busy, didn't they?
Right.
um, it's heavy, right, to think about, and sometimes it can be a lot to process. And I'm grateful that you didn't have to go to that the residential school, but you still carry that with you as a looming body, right? Like that's
Try to shield it from my son, which isn't always possible. Sometimes,
it's
that he's
tough.
still impacted.
Yeah. And like it's a fear. I think it's a fear that gets fostered inside, and it creates this hard shell that we have to learn to make more permeable and to adapt. And I think with more connection to community, the more we are able to support each other, the more we're able to know that you're not alone. I think a lot of times what the early intention of a lot of these things was to isolate us, to stop us connecting with our community, and then connecting to our larger communities as a whole, and then limiting our growth and our potential, and so that we just feel defeated. So I think an act of decolonization is community. What you're doing right now is active decolonization, because you're reaching out to other technical artists, Indigenous artists in these fields, creatives, and we're rebuilding those connections. It's like that brain kind of thing is going back and forth, and we're getting more clever as this happens. And I think it's an emotional cleverness as well, because we're also healing together. Because I think we see the potential and the growth in others, and be like, well, dang, if they can do it, I can do it too. And, I think demystifying these processes is a large part of it, and lifting each other up as we go through this. So,
You're right about Indigenous using tech. In my community, they built birch bark canoes. And in order to, I mean, it takes a genius mind to come up with the design for this canoe, the way it travels through water, the materials it's made out of, how you put it together, how you gather the materials. Like it takes math, it takes art, it takes engineering, it takes biology, all of these things. And I think that's true of every single nation. They were so connected with their environment and the land that they were able to create these incredible innovations
yeah.
based on where they lived and what they needed. And like there's I used to go to this hunting camp, and um, they would make whatever they needed. For some reason, we built a summer kitchen one year, and they built a screen door. And for some reason, I was blown away by the screen door. I'm like, oh my God, they built a screen door. I don't know why that was such a big deal. And I mentioned it, and someone turned around to me and said, of course, an Indian is never stuck.
Well, I think it works, right? Like, I think, our little Indigenious and
Brilliant.
our ability for art, like these two things are problem solving. They're looking at an issue and trying to approach it holistically. And I think that's the kind of the wonderful thing about Indigenous creatives, is that it's not just like a capitalist focused efficiency. It's also connected to like a more holistic approach. And I love the concept and the idea of what it could be like for having more Indigenous creatives in these spaces, and what extra things could they bring to the table and open up more of that game map of doing this better. When you're talking about building those canoes, I imagine when they built the canoes, they weren't thinking about how could I make the most money from this? How could I do this for me? How could I do this for all me? And it's more like, how can I make sure that if I build this canoe, we can use it, the community can use it, and then our grandchildren will be able to have a tree that they can also build one too. So it's not just like scraping the land clear and taking it for that one opportunity and running. And like that's I don't think that's anything that our people have done. So like, I'm not saying we're perfect. I'm sure maybe there's one or two out there that were being like little jerks, but I mean, like, as an overall whole, like, this is a better approach to these kinds of problem solving ideas. And I think when we apply those kinds of values at a larger scale, that it ripples outwards. And I feel like we'd have a better ecosystem to operate in. And like, that's a dream and a goal, a space I love to work in, because when I went to school, I was the only Native kid there. At first I went to a fine arts program. It was a 4-year program, and then I realized it was not going to be the what I needed to get into the animation field. So I concluded my year at the university, which I still think is a fantastic program. And I think there's a lot of really cool things, and education is really vital. And my parents, the one thing that they really kind of harped on, like how much education could open doors and open pathways to independence and sovereignty, so that I would not become dependent on these systems that they try to get us attached to, but then I could pave my own way forward and hopefully lift some people up along the way as I'm going, just so that we can keep doing this. But when I was in that school, I was the only one there, and a lot of the kids that were in the program, they had computers, they knew how to build computers, they had access to the software, they were already getting trained up, they came from very wealthy families, they were very international, so it was very internet all over the place. And like, this is a picture of some of my classmates, and when I first got there, I didn't think I had to hyper present myself as Indigenous. I knew I was Indigenous. Where I came from, they knew I was Indigenous. So it was also fairly male dominated as well. I had a couple of women in the class, and one became a very great friend. And I'm still friends with some of these people today because they're still in the industry. But the teachers had like a hard conversation with us too at one of these points in times. They're saying, hey, not all of you are going to get jobs, so make sure that you really commit to this. And I did. I stayed there until 3 a.m., 4 a.m., till the absolute last bus, trying to catch up, trying to hustle and absorb and learn everything I could. It was all new to me. I never sculpted online. I had the closest thing I had to a computer growing up was at my Auntie Jean's and Uncle Bill's when I was living with them. They had a computer. That's how I learned how to type with like ICQ, instant messenger kind of thing. but this really was a crash course in everything, and it was 1 year condensed, so it was super intense. It did lead to other kinds of things. Like, I really started to highlight a bit about me and what was kind of happening. You could be the FOD, the first, other, or different in a lot of these spaces. I was a woman, I was a minority, I was Indigenous. First time they ever, it was actually the first time for a lot of them to actually see a Native person. They're like, how come your hair's not braided, or where's the feathers, or you look too light, aren't you supposed to be really dark, isn't your nose supposed to be bigger? And I'm like, what list do you have that I don't have that you're doing this? And for the type of women that I grew up around, they were quite vocal, and they spoke their mind, and they were honest, and they're forthright. And for a lot of these other places, they're like, ooh, too much. I don't like it. You're supposed to be quiet. You're supposed to not say anything. You're not supposed to do all these things. So they had this list of all this other stuff that they expected of me. I'm the quiet one out of my family, so honestly, I can't imagine like how big if you met my family, then you'd probably be like, oh boy, okay, we're leaving. This is too much. But they're all awesome, and I don't, I always find it ridiculous. And I was dyslexic as well, so a lot of the software reading it was kind of difficult for me to learn that way. I needed more hands-on. I'm bi, and at that time there was still a lot of prejudice against bi folks. We just didn't talk about it, because you can't be both. You can't like both. You're only supposed to pick one. Blah blah blah. And you're like, well, no. So I think, and at that time I had like a teacher that told me I'd never be a character modeler. Like, he looked at my work and he's like, no, Maritza, I don't think you should do character modeling. I really think you should just try and apply for environment modeling positions. You're never going to really be very good at this. And I was just like, buddy, who hurt you? What made you so mad?
And that's what you do now for a living.
Yeah, and I've been doing that now for 20 years. Like, I do both. I can do both hard surface or environment models and the other ones. And like, that kind of comes back to like these preconceived ideas about us, right? Of like Indigenous and technology, that these things don't exist together, and we talk about they do, and it's been going on for a very long time. This is Indigenous artist. He's wonderful. He's also a writer, and it's absolutely fantastic. Stephen Paul Judd was wonderful. Yeah, and this comes like to the whole thing about like art isn't a real job. Indigenous people aren't technical. Yes, it's a real job. Yes, Indigenous people are technical. Why you gotta hate? And then it kind of jumps to like, people talk about animators. We talk about animators, animation. When people like, they still have this old idea of like what it is, that it's old timey guys like in little sweater vests smoking like cigarettes and drawing on a flipboard. My ex-husband had a flipboard and he worked on that sort of stuff too. But like, we are on the computer now. I use a Cintiq, and this is a part of some of the production stuff. Like, we were talking about the different types of jobs in animation. It's not like when people talk about animation, they're like, I can't draw, I can't do anything, I can't be in animation. No, because there are so many different jobs in animation, in visual effects, in games, in art presentations of this stuff as well. So like, you need production coordinators, you need producers. These are all like above the line, below the line kind of positions, and they're technical to various degrees. So you can love entertainment, you can love film and animation, and you can have a job there. You don't have to be able to draw to be in this space, or sculpt like I do. This is really cool. Like, it kind of goes through the layout, and like, this is where I'm in this little modeling position, and I do a little bit of here and a little bit of work with design back and forth to kind of help flush out their concepts. Quite often when you start out, you get like 3 images, and you need to translate that 2D into 3D. And sometimes when they really want you just to do, they just have one drawing, it's a 3/4, some stuff hasn't been figured out, and then that's where they lean on you to fill in those gaps and to bring it forward. And then we're working with other departments that are coloring it, that are putting the bones in the character to make it move. The animators have feedback as well for the deformation, because that's the technical part of it. It's one thing to make it look like the drawing and to be volume and to look like that. It needs to deform. And by deform, I mean like bend, move, smile, blink, close. All these things have to be created for this. And that topology, what we call topology, which is like that little chicken wire you might have seen on some like old timey Pixar videos. That's the topology that we use. So there's so many different jobs in this space, and these are some of the softwares that we use, and like I said, you're constantly learning in this space, and it's so fun in that way too, because you can't get bored. There's no way to get bored. I remember growing up, you said you were bored. You never said it. If you did, you'd be in trouble. They'll find you something to do. So, so in this space, I think that some of those values from growing up have helped me in this space as well, because I'm not bored. If I don't have something assigned to me, I'm looking for something to do. I'm looking for feedback and ways to develop and grow. I use Maya, ZBrush, Photoshop, ShotGrid, sometimes Houdini, sometimes Blender. It's kind of interesting too, because quite often what can happen is, like in school, I learned on a software called Softimage, which is very old now, and nobody uses it. And my first job I went to, I went in and they're like, "You know how to use Maya, right?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, totally. I got you." Went home and I tried to learn as much as I could, and I got to the table, and it's just a tool. A lot of this work is tools. So these are things that you use the same way that a carver uses certain knives. You're just learning how to use them, right? It's something that you learn as a tool, and it will change, it'll evolve, and you lean on your peers for support. Maybe they know something that you don't know. YouTube Academy has been quite handy, and a lot of people in this industry are self-taught and self-motivated. Sometimes they go to school for 4 years, 6 years, and they don't leave with a portfolio, and they have to build all that stuff up again. So it's quite wild. We talked a bit about representation, so about being, FOD, and quite often this is a wonderful program called Stay Tuned. It's on CBC Gems. Check it out. Jesse is on there as well. We spoke about. He has a really great interview, so watch his. 1.5 representation of Indigenous people on screen. That's brutal. That is so brutal. Like, we are smaller of the smallest of the smallest. So, like, when it comes to minorities on screen, quite often there's a select few that are the go-to default minorities, that are the allowable ones that are on screen, and only certain shades as well. It's getting better. It's improving. We are developing the skills and the tools to represent these people more authentically and more honestly, and better representation. Yeah, it's getting better. But for Indigenous people, we're still at 1.5. And these numbers are going up a little bit. Now, talk about behind the scenes. For Indigenous people, 0.07, so like 0 points, that's small. It's like not even a full person. So how is that? The math on that is bananas. And now we got bumped up to 1.4, and I'm hoping we got a few more that are coming in. And honestly, I felt that where I've been the only one in the studio, where you're there, and I now look at it and I can see what my mother must have felt, being one of the only Indigenous women working at a hospital. And she told me the stories about the racism, the ignorance, the isolation. I get it. Like, it's tough, and I can pass. Quite often what happens is, when the 215 happened, this kind of really lit a fire under me. But like, what happened there, 215, and for a lot of Indigenous folks know what it means. They know what it means. 215 is when they recovered the bodies of the 215 children from the Kamloops residential school. And when that day happened, I was working, and I had to tell them, "Hey, I need to take this day. I can't. I can't do this." And so I left, and I went to the water to find some calm and to collect myself about what was happening, because these are stories that we knew growing up. Like, if you went to Kamloops powwow, the school is still there, right? It's still there, and it kind of breaks your brain. And like, for me, when I was looking at what that meant, and then seeing how it impacted, my family, how it impacted my community, and then I got frustrated that my peers at the time, they were upset, but they didn't understand. And it would take some time to understand because it's so much to unpack. Like, it's new for them. It's not new for us. We know these stories. We've heard these stories growing up. And, my mother would share a little bit, but not a lot. She passed a while back, and I think it's directly connected to having to talk about it. Like, they made her go in a courtroom and talk about it, which is, makes me upset. And she carried that with her. And how can you rip a wound like that and then send them out with no support? Like, no wonder so many people were going through things afterwards. It's nuts. And
Yeah, they were traumatized.
oh,
And
absolutely. And
yeah,
they
there was
will cry.
yeah.
But so I don't, like that. That really encouraged me to not not be quiet about this stuff anymore, because I was quiet for so long about it because I had to survive. I
Yeah.
had to maintain my jobs. I used to bring up these like topics before, and it was early days, and so people are like, Maritza, stop talking about that. So you're bumming us out. We don't want to talk about this stuff. And be like, I'm sorry, that's a privilege that you have that I don't. You can put that away and not have to think about it. I carry it with me all the time. I don't want to. This is the worst inheritance that I think anybody could ask for. It's not something that you're like, I want to, inherit the old car and maybe some of Granny's beating or something. Oh, intergenerational trauma. That's okay. Can I give that back? Do you want? Can I?
You know?
I don't need to sign for that, do I? You want to keep that? Okay, cool. So like a lot of that stuff is so nuts. Like I don't understand. So for me, it did spark a desire to come back to it. Like I was talking about, like another person asked, and like my demo reel was actually about it was a little much. My demo reel was about a pregnant Indigenous woman that had her baby taken away at a hospital, and it was a miracle I got a job because of like the content that I was putting out there, and I was like, I was a little ahead of my time at that point. Maybe 20 years from now, it would have been more accepted, but fortunately, they saw that I could model, and then I got a job, so it was okay, and I kept working in this space, and so that's kind of why I definitely a lot of the work I do now on top of my regular work is outreach and mentoring and speaking to school boards, other programs, and doing work with mentees to try and lift up some of these barriers to help them feel supported as they're going through this way. To also to talk about with these schools that we need to reduce some of these barriers for entry. The funding needs to be adjusted. This is something that I think another place we were talking about, that there's some gaps. Like when I went to school, people talk about like, "Oh, you got it all paid for, didn't you?" And I was like, "No, I wish." What form did I miss? I didn't fill out. Oh man, I missed that chief and council meeting where they said they're giving away free money. No, and it. So the funding needs to change to allow for technical jobs like this and technical art crossover jobs like this to exist, so that it's not such a large imbalance. Because yes, the schooling for this type of work can be expensive, and more grants, more scholarships, more access to technology, having internet access, I think is vital. We spoke about this recently about how I think it's really important that it's almost like electricity and clean drinking water for access to the world and how to make your way in this space now, because so much of it's online. So having a steady internet connection is so important now. So these things need to be adjusted. You know, there was a famous artist, in 1970s. He came out and he was showing his art, and he wanted to submit for an Indigenous exhibition for funding. And they're like, "Oh, you know what? That's not Indian art. That's not Native art. It's not Indigenous art. That by our definition." And which is just like, talk about wanting to keep us as children and to keep us in the past, is like that happy version. But How was his last name? And he did this piece where it's like he took the letter, the dismissal letter of it, the rejection letter, And then he did artwork on top of it, and he's like, this is Indigenous art. It's Indigenous art because I'm Indigenous and I created this. And so when it comes to applying for art scholarships and this sort of stuff, doing work like this, unless it's specifically what their expectations are, it's really difficult to get funding. So this is where we need to change this to make it more open to allow for these forms of artwork, you know. Yeah, so the type of work I do is I typically contract out to a company, and they'll have me under contract for X amount of time. And the type of work that they do, sadly, really doesn't have Indigenous artwork in it to speak of, except for Moana 2. But we had cultural consultants, and that was absolutely brilliant. Um, you know, that was the first time I've actually ever had the opportunity to work with cultural consultants, and that was everything. To see them respected in that way was so beautiful, and to see the care and intention that they put into that, and then to see the reactions too. So I was able to get to work with the studio, and we did a community screening in my hometown because I worked on Moana too. That type of stuff was so cool, and I almost lost my train of thought getting all excited about about what it was. But like the protocols there, like we were able to bring the film back to community and to share it with the children there, and we were able to bring him in. We had David Derrick Jr., who is a wonderful director on the film, along with Dana. She's wonderful as well. She's Samoan, and Jason Hen. And so these people were so wonderful. But David Derrick, he did an intro for us, and he acknowledged the community, and we acknowledged the community. They lost it. The kids were in there. They're like, "He said shield!" They're like screaming. They're all like cheering, and like the moms and the parents that went in, and the grandparents that were excited to go in. They're like, "Oh, what did?" And for them to hear that and to hear that acknowledgement was absolutely everything, and it was beautiful. And then he was able to talk about his heritage as well, where he came from, and how meaningful it was for him to be a part of this production and to bring the story to the people. And then he also highlighted the Indigenous lands which the two studios are built on. So here it's Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and the Vancouver Walt Disney Animation Studio, and then the Burbank Studio, you know, which is the Chumash and the Tonga. It's so beautiful and so enriching to see. Incredible, and the fact that we were able to do this for the kids is so important. So, like, having the protocols to talk about this stuff is important, and it's acknowledging land acknowledgement's one thing, action's the next part of it, and then working with Indigenous communities even further. And we had an example of this with a mural that we created at the Vancouver studio with Indigenous artist Sheldon Pierre Lewis. And when they were building this new, because the Vancouver Walt Disney Animation Studio is new, and it is very new, and it's the second location. It's another location of the animation studio, and I'm just going to throw it out there. I think I'm the first Indigenous character modeler at Walt Disney. Please correct me if I'm wrong. If there are other Indigenous artists that worked at Walt Disney in the animation division at Walt Disney Animation, contact me. I want to talk to you. I'm curious. So yeah, but we were able to work with Sheldon to bring this mural, and it was connecting. It was about idea was about connection. It was about story. It was about growth, and honoring the lands, and then honoring the people. So it connected the interior Salish to the coast Salish, and we both have very different protocols, along with working with a larger corporation. And the idea was larger spanning, because this mural also was larger, that we're connected by water to like the Burbank studio, that we are of the same, and that we're working together. And it has a Spitzen. So Spitzen is a hemp rope, and it connected the mural across the space, and it's beautiful. You go up to like the loft and you can see it's on the wall. But doing this was a wonderful way of actually engaging with Indigenous peoples here locally, and what the protocols might be to work with an artist. So it's also about connecting, finding the artists, making sure that we do the correct welcoming ceremonies, that we're making the right connections to story, that we ask for permission for these people to be in the mural, because the Sheldon likes to use real people in his murals. It was really beautiful. But this also was a great way for a larger corporation like Disney to work with Indigenous groups like this to understand how that relationship can be built, how we can break down the discomfort of the unknown and make it more known, and to talk about the protocols with about content, talking with elders, having pictures of elders on the walls. Lucy is on the wall, and she's one of our beautiful elders on there, and that has the ancestors in the mural as well. I think this is really important too, because for other places I've worked at, they haven't done that type of work yet. And I want to say yet because I want to leave that open for them to join the conversation and to feel comfortable and to not be afraid to make the wrong step. Do it imperfectly perfect as you can, because the only way we're going to get more comfortable working together is by doing this more and breaking down this old idea of the old west of like cowboys and Indians, that we're modern people. We live in a modern space. We have the same modern problems that y'all do, and we just need to get past this and to start working with it better. And I think that's when it comes as another connection, because there are protocols. There's a couple of different accessible protocols that people can access, that studios can access, that smaller and larger companies can read. It's free, it's online. So there's no excuse not to know. Like, if I'm a guest in someone's home, if I'm a guest in someone's nation, right now I'm a guest. These aren't my homelands. I do have family here on the coast, but these aren't my ancestral lands. My ancestral lands are in the interior, Okanagan and North Thompson. But I make sure that I'm aware of them, because you want to be a good guest to a good host. And so learning the protocols is important for everybody. It's not just for Indigenous people. It's for the people on the land. And unless you're Indigenous, that probably means that you're a settler and that you've been here for multiple generations. We welcomed you here in hopes that you love the land as much as we do, and you love the people, and you want to be a part of this community. And so learning those protocols are important. How to speak to elders, how to honor story, how to use language, going through. And we did a welcoming ceremony here at the Vancouver studio, and they did one down in Burbank. They got all excited and they did one down there too. I was really proud of them. And this is something that we need to be more present of, because when I look at this space and being an Indigenous person on Indigenous lands I've worked at many different companies, not just this one, many different companies. And how is it that I could be the one Native person in that studio? Like, I've used this thing before, and I said it before. It's like going to France, going into the France studio, stepping in and seeing nothing but people from everywhere but France, and not actually having one person, not even a janitor. So I'm talking about all levels, from custodian to super boss, major boss of everybody, to happy minion, to artist, to production, anything. It's something that I think we need to improve upon, because we bring a lot to the table and we have a lot of shared values, and well, we always like making people laugh. We love story just as much. When I think about that type of work, when bringing more of our people into these spaces that bring up this type of information, like, what happens if I wasn't at the studio and it was built and all these things continued? So you're able to come into the room and also be an ally for your fellow BIPOC as well. Because I've been in those conversations, not at my current job, at another job, where they brought up the topic of a minority, and they wanted to make it more homogenous and not actually to show or highlight the features of that nation or that race, and then to change them and make them lighter because it was more palatable for international markets or something or other that they said. And I was like, I don't think they understand that it's important to see this diversity on screen, and for it to be from an authentic and holistic approach, not just like at the end, like, we did it, we're good. Because the children and the audiences, they're savvy, they're clever, they can tell when when places are phoning it in, and they throw it in at the end, and then you're just like, come on, guys, we could have changed this and did this a little bit better. Can we have introduced this? So this is like, I'm really pushing for a lot of places to focus this work at the beginning and to make it natural and authentic, and to work and ethical as well when we're approaching design. Because this shouldn't be an at the end idea of throwing in, X amount of money for this. It should be built into the budget early on at the beginning where it's the cheapest to do so, and just to make it habit. Because if you're doing a story in North America, no matter where you are in North America, there were Indigenous people there. And what's wrong? And they're still there. So what's wrong with including them in the background or anything like that? And maybe it's the discomfort of having to talk about it, having to connect with those people, but more we just need to get rid of that the kind of pussyfooting around it and just do it and connect with that nation and consult with them, bring them into the background design. I believe in our designers. They are very talented. They're so clever that they can work this into it. We're starting to see more of these characters introduced.
I think you're absolutely right. And building it in and making it part of the foundation of any project. And you're right, Indigenous and BIPOC like truly represent society as we know it, and it needs to be from the get go.
It's a large topic, and I think about tools again. A technology is a tool. Technology is not the full thing without the person behind it creating it, without the values, the boundaries, the protocols put in place by that person. A person makes ethical choices. A person decides to do these things. In my people's language in Silkshin, the word for computer is false brain. So I work on a false brain every day. What does that say about me? I don't know. But with, it's it's meant to be a tool, and I think AI is a tool. How I feel it connects with Indigenous culture, language, protocols, I feel is something that our people need a lot more awareness about, more understanding, more larger, bigger impacts. One of the gifts of our people, the Red Nation, is the gift of foresight. And I feel like if we have a feeling about it that it may not be going in the way that is best served for our people, is it a tool that we want to use? A tool can be something to build, something to create, something beautiful. I really value where our people's understandings and why it's a living language. Our language is living. Our stories are living. It's not block and written forever, unchanging, permanent. But I think when you have a verbal oral history and you have a living language, these are things that are important because there needs to be responsibility for that. That you take responsibility for what you do and what you say. And if you're giving freedom to an item that has limitless boundaries with no understanding of protocols, how would it know? So it's going to work very clumsily and stumble and make maybe a lot of missteps. So I think, like if we're feeding it all this information, we're essentially creating a pretendian. Like, do we really want to make a pretendian? Like, we don't. Dude, we deal with these guys enough as it is. Like, do we need to go out and make one? Like, that's not.
On purpose?
Yeah, I'm like, oh, yeah, one job, and what did you go do? But I think it's a tool that can be used for good and for bad, and it's whoever's harnessing and controlling and owning and taking responsibility for this thing. And if you're saying this is an item that has no responsibility, like a good parent, you wouldn't just like shoot out the kid and be like, "Go free, child! You are now to take over the world. I give you all this. Go nuts!" And no, you want to steward the child. You want to raise them with your values, with your beliefs, to be a compassionate person. Does this tool have the capacity to be compassionate? I don't know. I don't know enough about it to speak on it that way. But I think for our people, it's usage with cultural things that we hold so sacred. It's important to know who you're handing that to, and are they going to honor and respect it as much as you can, or that your people can. So that's something to consider when approaching it, and not just to glob on to something that's trendy and fun. Look at it holistically, because that's what our people are known for, and to really think about the long-term actions of it and how it can be used as a good tool to build and create things, and but honor the sacred as well. So I think caution and thoughtfulness is the best way forward with it. I don't think we should fear tools. That's not a way to do things. I don't think our people have feared that kind of advancement of technology. We're here, we're thriving, we're surviving, we're doing all these things, and there's room to grow, essentially, for that. But yeah, let's not make it pretending. Let's they're doing fine on their own, making themselves up as they go. So but that kind of like goes back to like what I'd love to kind of talk about. We were talking about data sovereignty and that idea of coming back to, I think it is vital for our people to understand, if you are digitizing your artwork, you are digitizing your stories, who holds that information in the same way that you wouldn't just be like, I'm going to tell a stranger they're going to copyright this. Like my people, we had this that happened. Like someone approached an elder and they talked about Ogopogo, which is a spiritual creature from my nation. And this fella came in and he copyrighted it. It's like copyrighting Jesus. It's like, how do you, you I'd love to see the guys that go into the patent office and be like, so I have this fella called Jesus and I'd like to patent him. Is that cool? It's like, you can't do that with stories. Like that's how like these stories are important to us. They're like ancestors, they're family. It's like going in and like, I want to copyright your grandma. Let's do that. And it's like, you can't do that. Like that's like these stories, these are our ancestors, these are our connections. So you can't copyright these things. So owning those protocols, like we only got that copyright back from that fella after having that large conversation. It was insane. I think because we have these values and they're perhaps different from other nations and other folks that are international that have come in and settled, they may not have that same sort of connection with and they may not understand that's a shortcoming for sure, but hopefully they'll take interest and want to understand how our values and our beliefs and want to be a part of this community as well to move forward. And I think awareness is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And asking questions and being curious and that sort of thing is going to help break down these barriers. Racism and prejudice and ignorance are still there. Apathy is not the option in this way, just because it makes people feel uncomfortable. Dude, we've been living in discomfort all our life and you have to deal with it for 10 minutes. I know you can do better, right? So it's like one of those kind of conversations to have. We're a little larger family, right? And I think that's about like rebuilding these connections that we're talking about, of the work that you're doing here and the work that I like to do externally as well, is speaking with these different groups. And I had somebody call me an activist and I'm like, I'm an advocate. Advocate. I'm like, but why is activist such a dirty word? But like they poo-pooed it and they're like, you're doing that activist stuff again, aren't you? And I'm like, about equality, inclusion, diversity. Why is that a bad word? I'm like, I'm not getting the insult here, but doing this work is important because we want to connect together. We want to stop this like old-timey belief of that we need to be isolated, we need to be separate. That's how we're going to protect ourselves. No, I think now is about the time for courage and moral courage to go forward and to connect with our distant ancestors, our distant relatives, and then our new relatives that are coming into the fold as well, of how we can work together to move forward to make this a better space for all of us. And that's what that means. But it's still honoring and understanding what happened before and not forgetting it because it makes you feel uncomfortable, but learning from that and not to go back there again. So like with the mentoring work that I do, I focus on supporting BIPOC creatives first, and then I deal with other ones as well. We have a lot of shared common struggles as well, working with other BIPOC artists and wanting to make sure that they have that ability to see that there are people in these spaces, and it helps to have that camaraderie, to have that allyship, to support them, to know that when somebody says something inappropriate about them, that you speak up for them too, in the same way that you hope that they would speak up for you. That's being a good relative. So when I think about that and making it a safe space for artists across the board and stopping these prejudice, and be like, when people say something terrible, you ask, I don't understand why you said that, and why do you think that's funny? Or why do you think that's an appropriate comment? Or do you actually understand what that comes from? It's correcting politely as best you can, and then changing the concept, and then opening the door for more questions. It's like, that's interesting that you thought about this. Why? But let's go further. How can we change your opinion on this because you think that all Indians are lazy drunks and blah blah blah? And okay, you learned that from X person or your family or blah, 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 or someone else. That's not true. And let me explain why that's not true. And let me give you examples of people in community and working. When I think back to how hardworking a lot of our minority groups are, that the idea of lazy is such a term that is such hard. Like, I don't think people understand like what level of barrier and grief that puts on BIPOC folks to have to deal with this stuff and constantly having to feel like you have to do twice as much work to meet the bare minimum. And that's something that I experienced coming up was I felt like I needed to do more because I was, FOD, and that just to make the average because it'd make me more palatable if I could do twice the amount of work and complain half as much and do all these different things. But that's unfair, right? It's not fair. We want to strive for equity across there, and I hope that with doing this rebuilding, this community rebuilding, and helping bring others in, that we can start to work together to break down those barriers and strive for more kids going into education, to STEAM, to other trades careers. It's almost like a digital trades, it's kind of what it is. It's a digital trade, and you're coming in there and there's so many opportunities for them to find a space that works for them. Maybe it doesn't have to be in entertainment. It doesn't have to be. It can be in communications. It can be in reporting. It could be in economic support and growth, or education. There's so much space that that our youth are getting into, that bringing this technology in with education is a wonderful way to do it as well. So there's a million opportunities, I think, that are available, and I always leave the door open for those to reach out and to connect if they want to ask any questions or to talk about this further. I do free mentoring for BIPOC young and young at heart to work in the space and just to help them get on their feet and get going as best I can hope for. I didn't have a mentor coming up, so I know what it feels like to kind of not know. So you're kind of wandering in the dark, trying to find your way through, and you're like, I
Yeah.
think this is nope. Oh, sorry,
Oh,
wrong
wait.
door, my bad. Okay, I'll go this way. We need people supporting these other people, and to not just be striving for, like, I do think we need people in leadership roles as well, but that isn't the only goal. Like, we should have those that want to be the hard workers, that want to be the creatives.
Yeah, when I was putting all of this together with ICMI, in my mind, I kept thinking we need more dog soldiers. We need more people. Just we need a louder voice. We need more uh, more participation and more opportunities for our communities. So I want to thank you, Kachimigwich. This has been an absolutely fantastic talk. I am definitely going to connect with you further, and we're going to post the those. There's two that I can think of off the top of my head about working with Indigenous people, the protocols around working with visual artists and with screen artists. We'll get those links up, and also any your website so people can contact you.
Yeah, just my first and last name at .com, MaritzaLouis.com, and that's a great way to connect with me and to work with mentoring and that type of work as well. And then I also like to give them a bunch of resources that they can go and do a lot of self-teaching. I know a lot of us can be stubborn too, and we want to do it on our own, but please reach out and ask for help. That's what we're here for. And I want to see you and everyone else succeed so I can start working with y'all soon in the future, and then we can have a great time. But thank you also for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a beautiful work that you're doing, and it's truly inspiring. And every time you have the conversations with people, I always want to be like, "Oh, that's a good point. I want to start talking to you guys about all this stuff." And I'm like, "We have a live forum. I want to do a Twitch stream with this and talk about all this stuff." And
But we'll talk about that. We are going to connect more. Uh, so this is fantastic. Yeah, my mind is starting to go, oh, wait, and pop with all these ideas. We will talk some more. And in the meantime, Kachimigwich, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Maritza.